While Napoleon's armies were still bleeding on foreign soil, a different kind of war was being waged inside France. One fought not with bayonets, but with ink, architecture, and controlled memory. No one noticed it happening. That was the point. By 1799, an entire nation's past was being surgically rewritten. Monuments renamed, textbooks altered, paintings commissioned, all while the battles hadn't even ended yet. History had never been edited at this speed. And the most disturbing part? The people living through it didn't just accept the revision. They celebrated it. What you were never taught in school is this. Napoleon didn't wait for victory to control the story. He controlled the story to manufacture victory. There is a question historians rarely ask about Napoleon Bonaparte. Not how he won wars, but how he controlled what people believed about those wars while they were still happening. This video is not about battles. It is not about strategy. It is about something far more disturbing. The systematic psychological reconstruction of an entire civilization's identity, executed in real time, with surgical precision. If you find this kind of hidden history as fascinating as we do, subscribe, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments. Do you think this still happens today? Because by the end of this video, you'll already know the answer. France in 1799 was a nation psychologically shattered. 10 years of revolution had stripped the French people of every stable identity they once possessed. Their king was dead. Their church was dismantled. Their social hierarchy had been violently erased. What remained was a population desperately hungry for meaning, for order, for a story that made sense of the chaos. Napoleon Bonaparte understood something that no military general before him had fully weaponized. A people without a coherent narrative are infinitely malleable. He was 30 years old when he seized power through the coup of 18 Brumaire, and within weeks, before a single major campaign of his imperial era had concluded, he was already reconstructing France's collective memory. Not through force, through something far more elegant. He began with symbols, the language of power that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to emotion. Street names were changed. Public squares were renamed after victories that, in several cases, had been strategically exaggerated in official reports sent back to Paris. The French population was celebrating battles they didn't fully understand, in locations they couldn't find on a map, based on information Napoleon's own press office had carefully curated. But here is what made this machinery truly terrifying. Napoleon wasn't just controlling the present. He was quietly, methodically, rewriting the past. Napoleon's first major psychological weapon wasn't an army. It was a newspaper. In 1799, he took direct control of the Parisian press, reducing over 70 independent publications down to a governmentally supervised handful. A move executed so quietly that most French citizens never registered the transition. What replaced those independent voices was something technically indistinguishable from journalism. Same format, same language, same familiar structure, but carrying an entirely different function. Every battlefield report was filtered. Every casualty number was adjusted. Every defeat was reframed as a strategic withdrawal. But Napoleon understood that controlling newspapers alone was insufficient. Words fade, stone endures. He immediately commissioned an aggressive architectural campaign across Paris. Triumphal arches, memorial columns, ceremonial boulevards, all designed to physically embed his version of history into the urban landscape itself. Citizens would walk past these structures every single day, unconsciously absorbing a narrative of inevitable French greatness with Napoleon at its center. The Arc de Triomphe wasn't decoration, it was psychological infrastructure. Meanwhile, inside French schools, new history curricula were being quietly introduced. Textbooks that presented the revolutionary chaos not as liberation, but as a dangerous period of disorder that Napoleon's arrival had heroically resolved. An entire generation of French children would grow up believing the story Napoleon had written for them, and they would defend that story as their own deepest truth. To understand why Napoleon's memory reconstruction succeeded so completely, you need to understand one uncomfortable psychological truth about human beings. We do not experience reality directly. We experience the story we are told about reality. And over time, we become neurologically incapable of separating the two. Napoleon didn't invent this vulnerability, but he was among the first leaders in modern history to exploit it with industrial-scale deliberateness. French society in 1799 was experiencing what psychologists today would recognize as collective trauma response, a population so destabilized by a decade of revolutionary violence that their critical thinking mechanisms were severely compromised. Traumatized minds don't seek truth, they seek coherence. They seek a narrative that stops the psychological bleeding. Napoleon offered exactly that, a grand, emotionally satisfying story in which France was destined for greatness. The chaos had meaning, and every sacrifice was part of an inevitable historical triumph. His propaganda didn't feel like propaganda. It felt like relief. He also deployed a sophisticated understanding of social identity, engineering a version of French nationalism so emotionally charged that questioning Napoleon's narrative felt psychologically equivalent to betraying France itself. Dissent wasn't just politically dangerous, it became socially unthinkable. And buried beneath all of this was perhaps the most disturbing mechanism of all. Napoleon had convinced the French people to become the active distributors of his own mythology, retelling his manufactured history to each other, generation after generation, entirely voluntarily. By 1804, something extraordinary had occurred, something that historians document, but rarely examine through a psychological lens. Napoleon's manufactured narrative had become so deeply embedded in French collective identity that even his most bitter political enemies were unconsciously using his language, his framing, and his historical reference points when arguing against him. The opposition was debating Napoleon on Napoleon's own psychological territory. He had won before the argument even began. But the machinery revealed its most terrifying dimension, not in Paris, but in the territories France conquered abroad. As Napoleon's armies moved through Europe, they carried with them not just weapons, but an entirely pre-packaged historical narrative, a psychological invasion that arrived simultaneously with the military one. Conquered populations were presented with rewritten local histories, repositioned to suggest that French dominance represented not occupation, but liberation from their own oppressive past. In several territories, local intellectuals, educated, critically minded individuals, genuinely accepted this reframing within a single generation. This is the detail that should disturb you most deeply. It didn't require force to make people believe a fabricated history. It only required consistency, repetition, and emotional resonance. Napoleon had discovered something that would be systematically weaponized by every major authoritarian system that followed him across the next 2 centuries. The human mind will choose a beautiful lie over a painful truth almost every single time. And the war, the real war, the one being fought inside human consciousness, had never actually stopped. It had simply changed uniforms. Napoleon Bonaparte died in 1821, exiled and physically defeated. But the psychological architecture he constructed never collapsed with him. The techniques he refined, narrative control, symbolic infrastructure, emotional nationalism, manufactured collective memory, became the foundational blueprint for every sophisticated propaganda system that followed. What he demonstrated, with terrifying clarity, is that controlling history requires no secret conspiracy. It only requires understanding human psychology better than your audience understands themselves. The most unsettling realization this story leaves behind is not about Napoleon specifically. It is about the vulnerability he exposed in all of us. Every society believes its own historical narrative is authentic. Every population is convinced its collective memory was formed organically. But the evidence suggests something far more uncomfortable: that most of what we call cultural identity was, at some critical moment, deliberately engineered by someone who understood exactly how malleable human perception truly is. So here is the question worth carrying with you long after this video ends. If Napoleon could redesign an entire civilization's memory in real time, using only newspapers, architecture, and controlled education, what is being quietly redesigned around you right now, while you are too distracted to notice? The tools have changed. The psychology never did. And the war for your historical memory, the war for what you believe is true about the world you live in, is still being fought every single day.